Sunday afternoon and time to get into the garden with Melanie Walker. Well, Mel, actually not into the garden to start off with, because we're talking out of the garden as the first topic today.
Yes.
There's been a furore around the world.
Ooh, around the world, I tell you. I mean, who knew that a cabbage patch could cause so much trouble? And what for me was the fact that they went there with 16 people and 3 Metro Police vehicles to go and hand over a fine for 1,500 Rand. And they had the wrong thing that they were charging him with. They said he wasn't allowed to grow cabbages. The problem is if you are going to grow on your pavement, and remember this for future, Jeremy,
Yes.
is that you need to leave space for pedestrians to be able to walk on your pavement so they don't have to go into the road, because you do not own the land. That's all they needed to say to him, was give him a warning in the first place and say, hey, you haven't got a pedestrian walkway here. Then somebody could have helped him put in a pedestrian walkway.
Yeah.
He could have grown his cabbages. I mean, we are all saying, we have been saying this for years, but we have a problem when it comes to food security, that use your pavements. I mean, Michael Rickoff was talking to us about this when we were talking about Guerrilla Garden.
Yeah,
It's just a couple of weeks back.
Yeah.
And use that space to grow food to help other people. And then it became this whole thing that everybody got their knickers in a knot, all of the aunties getting their panties in a twist, yeah? And it just went over and over. So, but now, anyway, the upshot is that I think there's a lawyer who said that they'll come in and take on his case pro bono. And somebody's already offered to pay the fine. He says he's not paying the fine, though. But go and plant a cabbage, if not on your own pavement, on somebody else's, because they don't own it.
Okay, now listen, this furore has been going around, but there's a bigger story that is not being highlighted, which you brought to my attention during the course of last week.
Okay, I'm sure that everybody knows I'm a total tree hugger.
Yes.
And I do go and hug trees, especially when I'm walking and I see the ones that have been attacked by shot-hole borer. I go and give them big hugs and tell them how sorry I am that, human virus has gone and once again messed up there. But there may be trees on the pavement. However, the story that broke this week, and I think it's freaked everybody out who's into the conservation of trees, was about the destruction that happened at the Voortrekker Monument. And to help us understand what was going on there, because I have to mind my P's and Q's. I go off pop and I need somebody with a level head.
Bloody right.
Which is why we asked Julian Ortleb from Tree Works here in Johannesburg to give us his views on trees and about what has been happening with people just willy-nilly cutting things down. So let's have a chat with Julian.
Yeah, Julian joins us via Zoom. Julian, thank you very much for your time and joining us on Mansfield today. For those people who don't know what's been happening, just give us a brief background to what has been happening at the Voortrekker Monument.
Well, I was alerted to it by Richard Gill, who is also a tree fundi. And what's happened is it seems like the current committee, someone on the committee has decided they wanted to restore, inverted commas, the landscape there. So what has happened is they've cut down pretty much, it's not all the trees, but they've taken down a vast amount of trees around the monument to restore it to what it was in the 1940s, as I understand it.
Okay, but part of the problem with this, though, apart from the fact that they're just cutting down trees when we should, in fact, be planting trees.
Especially as it's Arbor Month.
Yeah, exactly. But part of the problem is that some of the trees that they've cut down are, in fact, protected by legislation.
Correct. As Melanie said, in Arbor Month, they have butchered all those trees, and also the yellowwood tree. I believe there's at least one yellowwood tree that's been cut down there, and those you may not remove. And interestingly enough, if we're talking about heritage of that particular monument and that culture, the yellowwood is quite significant and important to them. So it just seems like somebody's gone absolutely gung-ho and cut down all the trees.
Okay, but the two questions that arise out of that answer. The first one is, I was of the opinion, and I may be wrong, that a fair amount of those trees that are planted around the Voortrekker Monument were trees that were in fact brought up along the roots of the trek and planted there to signify where the trekkers had trekked. That's the first thing. And the second thing is has anyone engaged with the committee of the Voortrekker Monument on this, on what's happened here?
Yeah, so you are correct. There do appear to be some tree species there that were brought up along with the trekkers as they made their way up, which have been cut down. Richard Gill has been involved in this, and he's put together a very comprehensive report. He's actually visited the site and taken photos and put together a report to hand to the what are they called? The Heritage Foundation, or the Heritage Management Group at that particular monument. I don't know if a response has been received yet. I do know that they tried desperately to remove the post that went up about the incident there. So I think they do realize that what they've done is wrong. But, you know, the problem is it's done. And now how do you repair and how do you restore all that? You can't. I mean, this is decades and decades and decades of growth. And their argument was that they want to restore it to the 1940s. The 1940s was a very different place in this country, in the world. Less cars, less pollution, less tree pests, less disease, less tree deaths, less development. So if it was grassland and natural habitat, that's fine. It suited them. That's what it was. You know, at that time it was okay. But now we need to be preserving as many trees as we possibly can because of, number one, the polyphagous shottle borer, which is killing tens of thousands of trees in Johannesburg. It hasn't yet made its way in full force, I don't believe yet, to Pretoria, but it's coming. It's in other parts of the country. We have development where trees, I mean, I drive to school to take my kids to school, and there's this huge property that's just been cleared for clusters again. And this is happening time and time again. We cannot afford to be losing trees now like this. It's just absolutely ridiculous what's happened there.
Okay, I'm going to do what I know I shouldn't do right now, and I'm going to let the little Rottweiler off its leash.
Yeah, no, I just sit there and I mean, it's not just the trees. They also cut down all of those like decades-old succulents as well, some of which are like really wonderful indigenous plants. And sure, they may not have been from that area specifically, but how do you justify, how do they justify doing that, first of all? And then secondly, going and covering up stumps with mud and rocks and everything to try and hide what they'd actually done. Surely there must be some checks and balances here, that there must be something in the law that turns around and says, right, I don't care what happens, you guys are actually in for it now.
One would certainly hope so, specifically in this instance, because it's a monument. I mean, surely you can't just be let loose on a monument of national importance and then just decide, well, we're going to just do all this felling. You can't do it. But you know what we must also realize is that this is one instance, and it's a big one because it's a public space, and people have seen it, and it's made it's created this big uproar. But this is happening all over the city on a much smaller scale in the development of properties. The city's densification plan is wrong. We should not be cutting down trees that are not affected or going to survive this PSHB catastrophe we're having in the city now. And it's not tying up. I mean, city parks, you know, they sign these agreements of belonging to this and belonging to that, but I don't see them doing or carrying out what they should be doing in protecting our trees. And the city of Johannesburg itself is complicit in the destruction of trees by allowing or gazetting this densification program and wanted to go ahead with it, which is primarily in the areas where we have our big urban forest canopy. Yeah. And it's going to go.
But then, Julian, why isn't it like it is done in, say, KZN? And I know specifically in KZN because my father used to do all the plotting of the trees for people who were wanting to actually develop a piece of land. There were certain trees. They had to have that plan beforehand, saying these are the trees that are on the property. They are not allowed to be touched. you will have to build around them. Okay, why do they not have that in all the provinces, and especially in Gauteng, where we have this problem?
Well, it's a very good question. Every single property should have a tree assessment. A tree assessment should be part of your application to council. You should not be able to develop a property unless you have a tree assessment. You've put together a tree protection plan of what trees you're going to protect, how you're going to protect them, who's consulting you on the work. All of that should happen. We do seem to have some sort of protection of the trees that if it's older than 60 years, you may not cut it down, but nobody's policing these rules and bylaws and regulations, whatever you want to call them. They're not being policed. People are just going ahead and doing, and there's no consequence. And the problem is, unfortunately, as we're seeing everywhere, is that there's no accountability at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's
something and you get away with it.
You can have as many laws or bylaws as you want. If they're not policed, they're absolutely useless. But the thing that scares me the most is that where these developments are generally happening are in urban areas where there are very old, big plots. And a developer will come along and make a very good offer to somebody who's had an old, big, rambling house that's been there for years and years and years. And on that big plot are these huge old trees. And they'll then knock the house down, and they will literally scalp the entire earth so they can fit in 16 units to sell off and make a huge amount of money. And with that scalping process goes trees that are, as you say, some of them are over 60 years old. They've been there for yonks.
Some property developers are just they need a good smack. I worked for a very good one. We did the assessments. We made sure that if there were big trees, that the trees were factored in with the architect and everything. And that's here in Johannesburg. So they really should be doing the same thing as they do down in KZN, where you're not allowed to touch the land until you've had the assessment done. And that's it. I've had people moaning all weekend about, oh, the councillors are not helping me, and they're saying they're being obstructive because we can't get our development on the go. And I'm like, well, have you done your tree assessment? That's what's holding it up, and hopefully it'll hold it up forever. Sorry, that's me just getting really cross. It's crazy. I mean, we should all be planting trees, and especially this month. If you haven't planted a tree yet, go and plant one. You can plant it on your pavement even. Do you know that?
So, Melanie, this isn't rocket science that we're dealing with here. I did my practical in the States many, many years ago. And it's very easy to save trees on properties and developments. You don't have to stop the development, but it has to, the properties need to be designed around the trees, and then you need to consult with an arborist, because you can say you're protecting trees or you're saving a tree, but you've got to chop off all the roots. 5 years' time, that tree that you've saved is now dead because you've damaged it during the construction process. So it's not a matter of just digging around a tree. There's proper protocols. But we need to actually start looking at this quite seriously now, because just to give you an example, there are suburbs in Johannesburg that are lined with the same type of tree that's a reproductive host for the polyphagous shottle borer. In 15 years' time, those suburbs will not have any street trees, and they will become heat islands. So what's going to happen is the roofs of the houses will get hot, the tar surface will get hot, and that suburb becomes a massive, massive heat island, and that can change the climate. What's going to happen is property values are going to be affected, people's health is going to be affected, and the appeal of the city is going to be lost, because we are one of the biggest man-made urban forests in the world, and we're going to lose that status. And nobody's doing anything. The authorities are not doing enough. We are seeing trees dying. You drive through Parktown North, for example, the plane trees are dying. They're falling apart. There is going to be a life claim. Forget your electric fence, your car, your windscreen, your house roof. There is going to be a life claim, because a tree is going to fall, or a big part of a tree is going to fall on someone. This is going to happen because there are so many trees in the road. Why are they not removing the trees now, planting new trees, so that in 15 years' time, when Parktown North, for example, will be barren, we have trees that are already 15 years old? It is not rocket science. It is just practical.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's where we're going to have to leave it, unfortunately. Julian, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us. Julian Ortler from Tree Works. Mel, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We'll follow the story and see where it goes.
And I'm just going to say one more time, please, just find out what trees are on the list that aren't affected by the polyphagous shot-hole borer. I know that everybody wants to plant coral trees at the moment. Please don't. I know they look beautiful, but they are also a reproductive host. So don't get those. But please get a tree, plant it somewhere. We need to start doing it, and especially if you live in the parks and you can see where the polyphagous shot-hole borer has been, go and plant a tree next to it in the interim so that you have one that's already growing and will get to full size, and we can actually try and save our city in 10 years' time.
Melanie Walker, thank you very much for
Thank you very much, Jeremy.
We'll catch you next Sunday with more from inside and outside the garden. And until then, we'll put the Rottweiler back in her run.
I'm a Doberman, a bull terrier. I'm a bull terrier. That's what I.
Bye bye.